Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember that the chat room is always open, the only social media out there worth actually socializing in. That's at crusadechannel.com/chat. And we would encourage anybody who's listening to us to go to crusadechannel.com and become a premium member. A lot of great programming going on with the King Dude, Joe Resinello. You got the King Dude, Mike Church, Rick Barrett, Brother Andre Marie. Kennedy Hall is there. By the way, just as I mentioned, Kennedy Hall is a great article in Crisis Magazine about pornography. So I would encourage anybody, not now, don't leave us now, but if you get a chance, go on Crisis Magazine. Kennedy Hall's got a really good article about what men can do to fight against and overcome a porn addiction. And it's something that Joe and I hammer on all the time. That's one of the more insidious attacks of the devil. So it's good that men like Kennedy, like us, like King Dude, we're talking about the evils of pornography. So I encourage you all to read that and join the Crusade channel. Remember, Joe and I and our producer, Jonathan Ross, we have our website, thefrontlinetv.com, thefrontlinetv.com/subscribe. Joe Resinello, the operative word there is subscribe. Okay. And we're not asking for the moon and the stars. Of course, we know you support us with your prayers. So we want to just say right off the bat, we thank you for that. If you could throw in $5 a month, that's all we ask. Really, our goal is to have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who enjoy the FrontlineTV.com and all the programming, not just Frontline with Joe and Joe. So we would ask you to do that and encourage you to do that. In the meantime, Joe Resinello, you are notorious for saying, notorious, all right, for talking about bad fruit. Now, why should you? Well, Jesus talked about bad fruit. And, sometimes, Joe, we always ask ourselves, well, is what I'm doing right? Is what I'm doing wrong? Am I on the right path? Am I on the wrong path? Well, Jesus gave us the answer. He said, you will know them by their fruit. And we're not Vatican II bashers. We're far from it, okay? We had on Professor Robert George a while ago. We talked about it, okay? That's not the issue. The issue is the spirit of Vatican II, the hijacking of Vatican II to suit a more modernist, which Pope Pius X called the synthesis of all heresies, a more modernist church. And that's just not right. And we want to talk about that. But we're going to talk about two things in particular. One, we're going to focus on Bishop Robert Barron. Now, he wrote an article. A lot of people, Joe, we get put into these camps. If you mention Bishop Robert Barron, right away, they're expecting you to either love the guy or hate the guy. He's a bishop. If he says something good, we're going to point it out. If he says something we disagree with, we're going to point it out, and we're always going to be respectful, okay? He wrote an article about let's say, religious people or natural religion. And, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong. You've read the Catechism twice, okay? The church speaks of natural religion, the inner desire to belong. There's aspects to religion that, of course, the fullness of which in the Catholic Church, okay? So Bishop Robert Barron had an article about it. We feel like we need to talk about it and tie it into what we believe is the hijacking of Vatican II and the watering down, in many cases, of our faith. We'll get into it a little. We're going to hash it out here, but then we're going to talk about the resiliency of our faith, okay? And of all places, Albania, which, Joe, I did not know how bad Albania was. I knew Enver Hoxha was a pretty nasty guy, okay? But I lumped him in with Ceausescu and some of these others. Like Ceausescu was in Romania, obviously Stalin and all that. He was a particularly bad character in the 20th century. We're going to get into that. But the resiliency of the Albanian people, and let's say the way they got back to religion, and from what I understand, we're going to talk about it, the Catholic religion after the fall of the Soviet Union. So I just wanted to lay a little foundation for today's talk because I think it's a good one. I think it's a good one to have. And with that, Joe Resinello, I am going to hand it over to you.
Well, when you sent me the Robert Barron article, I read it, and basically, I guess the idea that he's driving home, and it's true. He's saying that people are leaving institutional religion. Now, obviously, you can't get any more institutional than the Catholic Church. I mean, it is arguably the institutional religion in the world. So why? So it immediately made me think of the spirit of Vatican II because John, who's our producer, and it's almost like providential. He ran on our channel last night the interview with Ralph Martin, and he wrote a book, The Crisis in the Church, and that was the interview. But Ralph laid it out perfectly when we were talking about this, and I said, well, Ralph, maybe some of these people are sincere, meaning their interpretation of Vatican II. And he said, but it doesn't work. And he's right.
Right.
It hasn't bore good fruit. Now, let's define our terms, Joe, before we get into it.
Sure.
What do we mean by the spirit of Vatican II? Here it is. This is what it is. It's the teachings and intentions of the Second Vatican Council, which were interpreted in a way that is not limited to a literal reading of the documents, or even interpreted in a way that contradicts the letter of the council. So, what I mean by that is what a lot of American Catholics see in a regular church is not, in fact, what is in the documents of Vatican II. And sadly, a lot of Catholic commentators who have beefs with Vatican II are looking at a bastardization of what the documents actually say. For instance, and I'm not a scholar of the law, nor am I a canon lawyer. Do you know, Joe Pasillo, that in the documents of Vatican II, that the Mass is supposed to be said towards the tabernacle ad orientem? That is in the documents of the actual text. Right. Now, here's another thing. Mother Angelica tried to institute that, and she actually ran up against the bishop. They said, no way. Now, what I would say is this. Why did you write it down then? Why did you write this stuff down if you're not going to follow it? And also what I want to bring up, two things, Joe, and then you can comment.
Sure.
Who was the gentleman from Alabama, blue collar, what's it called? Apologetics. John, Italian guy. I can't believe I can't think of his name.
John Martignoni.
Bingo. He said, nothing has changed. The essence of our faith has not changed because of the documents of Vatican II. He said that. He's a real smart guy. That's his business. And here's another thing. If you read the documents themselves, I guarantee you'll walk away with a different outlook on the council. And this is the second thing I want to say, and then we could just bounce back and forth. The Catechism of the Catholic Church spells out the infallibility of an ecumenical council. Consequently, the teachings of the Second Vatican Council are the official teachings of the Catholic Church. Let me repeat that again. The documents, not the way that they're sadly interpreted, the documents themselves are the official teachings of the Catholic Church. You wouldn't know that based upon how people talk in the social media circles.
Well, I think that what happened is, when you listen to a lot of people, and Joe, you and I at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, we try to keep our eyes open, ask the Spirit to guide us, enlighten us. Joe, we've talked to some very learned people. Okay.
Oh my gosh, the most learned, actually.
The most learned. When you look at, let's say, Scott Hahn, Ralph Martin, these are not liberals. These are not, and there are liberals in the church. There are leftists in the church. There are radicals in the church. There's a whole bunch of sorts of people in the church. These are not liberal people. They're orthodox in their view. They're
balanced, and also they're charitable.
Right. They're much more charitable than Joe and Joe. Or let me speak for this, Joe.
By far.
But and they've said Robert George is another example. And people bash Robert George. I don't think that that's fair. Robert George said the documents themselves are beautiful. Not for anything. I'm going to listen to Robert George. I think he's a good man. I think he's a very good Catholic, and he certainly has an intellect that could sift through this kind of fog sometimes. Okay, he said flat out on our show after he got done talking about the documents, he says, "Now let's get into the spirit of Vatican II." And Joe, you knew where he was going. No, the point is, Bishop Robert Barron, okay, he talks about this idea that there are many of those people in America who are spiritual but not religious. And by implication, I think you could take from that these are many people that are probably the sons and daughters of fallen away Catholics post Vatican II. Now, what Bishop Barron is saying is that, but they still have natural religion. Now, he's not saying that's enough. I'm going to say that right now. He says himself that's not enough. The reason why I like the article is because when I think about it and what we do at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, that to me is a challenge to us. That because these people still have, now they might have moved away from the church because of the hijacking of Vatican II, the watering down of our faith, what a lot of people, Joe, in charity, the Protestantization of our faith, okay, the subjectification of our faith, the elevation of conscience over God's law, all these things that are really part of the spirit and the hijacking of Vatican II, but not stated in the documents, okay? My thing is that if people who Bishop Barron describes as spiritual but not religious, hear people like us who are striving imperfectly to be disciples of Christ. Let's be clear, okay? We are not perfect, and we say that all the time because it's true, all right? But if they hear us talking about the beauty, the goodness, and the truth of all Catholic teachings, then perhaps that's the low-hanging fruit that we in our generation that can bring back to the church. Now, that's what I'm hearing from Bishop Barron. On the flip side, Joe, and I'm gonna flip this over to you. On the flip side, no, but I want your comment. On the flip side, I would say that part of the problem and why these people are spiritual but not religious to begin with is because of the hijacking of Vatican II. So let me leave that with you and see what you think of that.
Well, let me first say that all people have a desire for God. So if you want to use the term spiritual, everyone has that yearning for an elevation of the spirit, whether they acknowledge it or not, because we were made by God, for God, to live for God and to be with him for all eternity. Whether you acknowledge it or not, that's the truth. Now, why do people call themselves spiritual? That's the first piece of your question. Because they don't want accountability. It's a way to say I'm spiritual, but I'm not into institutional religion, because institutional religions puts boundaries around your life, as do anything civil, a society, a family. You can't just you have to have boundaries.
Yeah. I was going to say, Joe, it's not just religion.
Anything, that's right. When they put the wind catcher that you ever see that thing, that crazy circle with feathers coming out of it. I'm spiritual. And they put it in like their windshield. Oh, I'm spiritual.
I swear. I'm sorry, Joe. I want to throw up when I see that.
No, but I'm just saying.
I want to see. I want to throw up when I see that and the coexist bumper sticker with the cross.
Right. But that's another story. That's the first piece. Why are people leaving the church? Now, you could look at even someone like, I'll use myself. I'm still in the church. Don't get me wrong. But I was looking for something more. Why? Because one of the beefs with the Novus Ordo rite is it's lost the sense of the sacred. We no longer get that sacred. Now, the Latin Mass, to its credit, gives you that sense of the sacred, and people feel fulfilled. Now, I am not a Latin Mass attender, but I went to orders. Now, I've gone to Mass at the Missionaries of Charity convents. Now, I'll be honest with you. I challenge any person out there, Latin Mass, Novus Ordo, you name it. Find a holier group of people. They don't go to the Latin Mass. And I'll be honest with you, I've never seen better Catholics ever in my life than those nuns. Novus Ordo Mass. The Mass is said in a very sacred manner. CFRs, Sisters of Life, EWTN. You watch the Mass on TV. The sense of the sacred is there, and it's attractive.
Father Imperato celebrates the Mass.
There you go. So what I'm saying is this. The reason Barron, he's talking about why people are leaving, I personally think, and if bishops are listening to me right now, if by any chance they would listen to me, a Gavone like myself from New Jersey, what I would say is this.
You and me both.
Listen, Your way, as Ralph Martin put it, and you should listen to our interview in his book, talking about his book, Crisis of the Church, it's not working.
Right.
Your way, the spirit of Vatican II doesn't produce fruit. Stick to the documents. Stick to the documents and people will stay.
See, this is my thing, Joe, is that when you listen to some bishops, okay, and you explain to them, you say, the fruit is not good. And they say, well, what are you talking about? We have conversions, and they point to statistics. Statistics are not telling the story. Okay, take Cardinal Dolan. Cardinal Dolan, respectfully, Cardinal Dolan has said, look at the numbers since Vatican II. We've had more people come into the church. Your Eminence, we have had people leave the church in droves. And many people who come to the church, okay, are expecting a different kind of church than the church that, let's say, the church that is, the church established by Christ, that has those boundaries, Joe, that you were talking about. And the appeal to those people is usually, I'm sorry, this is the way I'm going to put it. I know this might be off-putting to people. It's a more Protestantized church. Oh, you mean I could go to the church and I can contracept? Because the priest in that parish says I could contracept. The priest in that parish, we covered Father, what's his name? The chaplain of the House of Representatives. He says you could actually be pro-choice and Catholic. It's like,
but that's not Catholic, and
that's my point, Joe. That's my point. Is that don't tell me we have conversions. The conversion is to the fullness of the truth in the Catholic Church, okay? And the reason why, getting back to Bishop Barron for a second, people have left, is what Father Carapi said 25 years ago when the bishops in South America asked him his opinion, and they said, why are people leaving? And, you know, Carapi, he turned around and he says, they're leaving because of you. It's your fault because you watered it down. Joe, we had on Carter Griffin the other day. We talked to Carter Griffin. He used the word confident, bold. We use the word muscular. That's not machismo. The Catholic faith is a muscular faith. Why? Because that muscularity, Joe, it pushes away the fogs out there. Okay, it's straightforward. It's like the rhino going through the jungle. The branches get into its skin, and the rhino keeps going. That's the Catholic Church. It's the battered and bruised ship sailing along the ocean that's been through storm after storm after storm. Ultimately, the reason why it's able to survive is because the ship is built in a very strong way.
Well, it's built on Christ, Joe. It's built on Christ. You see, what people
that's what I mean.
But what people haven't figured out, again, a jadrule. I'm going to throw that one. Have you heard that one for a while, dude?
Listen, Joe, I bet you all those people at the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, we might have mentioned that word once in the whole time we're with King Dude. For those of you out there who don't know what a jadrule is, okay, it's a pickle. Okay. Or a pickle head.
Well, a jadrule like myself has figured this one out. And this is this. If you stick to the vine, you'll bear fruit. You see, again, I have eyes. And here's what I have seen in my 3 decades of walking in the faith, the Catholic faith. Orders that stick to the vine. What does that mean? They follow what's on the paper.
Right.
They bear fruit. They get people to come in, they join, they get vocations, and people flock to them. They bear fruit. Providence takes care of them, and orders that don't. Churches that stick to the vine, stick to what's written, they bear fruit. We have to, the answer is so simple. We don't trust the documents, i.e. Vatican II. So we come up with all these stupid ass programs. We come up with all these felt banners, and this is going to reach people. No one has a better mind than the mind of God. And I'm going to repeat it again. The Catechism of the Catholic Church spells out the infallibility of an ecumenical council. What does that mean? That means you can't say, I don't acknowledge Vatican II. That's what that means in the catechism. So when I hear that, I'm going to be honest with you, I twitch.
Joe.
And I don't care that you go to what mass, and I don't care if you pay 5,500 rosaries a day. I'm going to repeat it again. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says it's an ecumenical council is infallible. Consequently, the teachings of Vatican II are the official teachings of the church. The problem is we're not following them.
Well, part of that is you have one camp that says everything in Vatican II needs to be trashed, which we obviously don't agree with.
Joe, that's
and
not
Joe,
a Catholic camp.
I don't think it's. I don't think it is either, because you cannot deny that Vatican II is a legitimate ecumenical council of the church called by Pope John the 23rd, who is a saint. That's not the issue. The issue is there's two camps. You have one that says we just need to start over again. Well, not really. Even if 95% of the documents are sound, and the other 5 are ambiguous, and we know all about ambiguity because of our current pope. Okay, well then you deal with the 5%.
Then just tighten that up.
Right,
like you could tighten that up.
But the other part of it is those who do not. They say, Joe, and this is the nefarious part. They say, well, we need to go back to Vatican II, but then what? How do you define Vatican II? And yes, unfortunately, Joe, there is a definition that needs to be put on that, which is it the word and the letter of the documents of Vatican II that you want us to go back to? Or is it this hijacked spirit of Vatican II that has led to, and I'll kick it back to you, that has led to the watering down and led to the departure that Bishop Barron is talking about? And I want to get into that a little bit more, but I want your answer, because that's what it seems to be. It seems to be trash the whole thing or don't question it at all. And I don't think either one of them is very Catholic. What do you think?
Well, a couple things. I'd say stick to the documents. We don't see what Vatican II is all about because we're not sticking to the documents. That's number one. Number two, it's the spirit. Who are you? Like in terms of the proverbial, who are you to come up with the spirit of whatever? Listen, I'm a simpleton. I'm a peasant. I read what's on the paper and I do it. Just read what's on the paper and do it. People think they're too damn smart. And here's another thing. The church is not yours to recreate. This goes for the people on the left and it goes for the people on the right.
Right.
It's not yours to recreate. Read the documents and execute. We have to get more into the Forrest Gump mentality. Why do you put that gun together so well, Gump? Because you told me to,
drill sergeant. That's right.
That's why. And I'll tell you this. If we stuck to those documents, and I watched the EWTN Mass, outside of the ad orientem aspect of it, I'm butchering the Latin, forgive me, please. That's a pious Mass. That's a beautiful Mass.
Of course it is.
And here's the thing. If we got back to that and people got this law, they feel the sense of the sacred. I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of this conflict, I believe, with the Latin Mass versus the Novus Ordo Mass, it wouldn't exist, because I actually think people would be fulfilled if we did what the document said as it's written, black and white.
Well, Joe, I will put it like this to you. Joe Arsenello, Joe Pasillo on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Joe, I look at it this way. If I've made some statements in my life. Well, let's start with you. You have said, I follow the documents. You've always told our audience, you're a compliance guy. What it says is what I do, okay? We apply that, obviously, to church teaching, okay? I have always said in my life, the reason why I'm a good actor and why directors like to work with me and have in the past, both in film and in plays, is because I'm a good actor, meaning when the director says, this is what I want, I'm very good at executing that. My larger point is this. What underlies what I just said? Because I accept the authority of both. Once I've accepted the authority of both, well, then I have to do what they tell me to do. If the director is the authority on a movie set, He's the director. Joe, everything that goes on a movie screen for every movie you watch, the director is responsible for that. I don't
Director,
care if there's a
genre.
guy biting his
Absolutely.
nail. The director's, if you agree that he's the authority, then you do what he tells you to do. I agree that the church is the authority. So I do what the church tells me to do. If somebody's deviating from church teaching, I say, I don't want to do that. That's not church teaching. If the church, and some of it, not the church proper, church men, leaders in the church, deviate from Christ, then I have to fall back and say, but that's not right, because I accept the authority of you as the church. But if you deviate from your authority, which comes from Christ, then you're not doing your job. My larger point is that I've been very good in my life that if you tell me what to do and I accept you as an authority, then I'm going to go ahead and do it. And I think the problem with the hijacking of Vatican II is they say, well, I'm looking at the authority of Vatican II. I could do whatever I want. Yeah, but the documents didn't really say that, did it? And yet these people still lean on Vatican II. And by the way, here's another thing, and I'm going to kick it over to you. I'm tired of people saying that if you question this notion that we're doing tonight, the spirit of Vatican II, somehow we're not being faithful to the church. No, we are. Now, I know the trads have their beef with it, and I don't have a beef with either group, but don't blast guys like us, because we're not being cowardly, because we're trying to find a proper perspective in all this. And I think, Joe, perspective has been lost in a lot of this. What do you think?
Well, listen, someone in the chat room said the church has gone wrong since the documents of Vatican II. I will say this. The church has gone wrong since Vatican II, but it's not because of the documents. It's because we're not executing on them. And someone else said in the chat room, the Latin Mass was created by Christ himself. They didn't say the Mass in Latin when Jesus was around. Like, where do you get this stuff?
Right.
Like in all honesty, once again, I'm a simpleton. I know how to read. Read the documents and then talk to me.
Right.
What I'm saying is this. The Latin Mass is said in a way that's more sacred. There's no question about that. That does not mean that the Novus Ordo Mass, the sacrament, is invalid. No, anyone who tells you that is twisted.
Joe, there's not a lot of people. Go ahead.
But here's the thing. If we get that sense of sacred and execute on the documents themselves, I think we have a completely different conversation. And here's the thing on both sides. You get people of the spirit of Vatican II that come up with all these insane ideas, insane. And I've seen some of them in plain English. I had a priest tell me once, I couldn't receive on the tongue in a Novus Ordo Mass. This is 10 years, 15 years before friggin' COVID. I'm like, what are you, crazy?
Right.
What are you, crazy? Like, I didn't go to the seminary. I know you're wrong. Then you have people on the right who are friggin' out of their mind. I read things on Twitter. I'm just like, these people are out of their frigging mind. They're not even Catholic. And the funny part is they think they are. They think they are. They refute the teachings of the church because they're trying to recreate it in their own image. That's just as Protestant as going out the left door.
Joe, if trads, let's call them trads, conservatives, okay, those who question the bad fruit of the last 60 years, and Joe, let's face it, we know that there's bad fruit. Again, you and I could talk over it. There's terribly bad fruit. Okay. When you hear some of the stupidity that goes on in RCIA classes, CCD classes,
I got thrown out, Joe. I know.
I know you got thrown out. All right. And all you were doing was sticking to the documents.
That's right.
You stick to the documents. Okay. But you stick to the documents and say, there's the door. Get out. They scream at you. Right? They chase you through the door. And it's like, that is the problem. And it leads to a frustration that I would say, and this is where I am very sympathetic to the trads, where you say to yourself, well, then we really need to have Vatican III. Then we really need to sit down as a church. Now, not us, the leadership, the bishops with the Pope, and they need to discuss this, because if there's Joe, remember something. See, ultimately, all authority comes from Christ. Okay. I'm of the sheep as you are of the sheep. We are
I
not the
smell
shepherd.
like the sheep too, Joe.
Well, I do too many times. Okay. The sheep have to listen to the shepherd, and the sheep are not confused by the shepherd. The shepherd does not go out of his way to confuse the sheep. The shepherd's there to protect the sheep from the wolves. That's why he carries the staff. Okay. And if the shepherds, and we know this, and we're not bishop bashers, but let's face it, there's been very bad men in the church in the last even 100 years, okay? And even going back a little bit further than that, okay? When they're not protecting us, when they're not clearing away the fog of war in this spiritual battle that we're in, if they're leaving us confused, okay, then we have to speak up. That's where I am that's where I am trad in that way, where I would say, listen, I'm the sheep. You're the shepherd. I'm supposed to listen to you, but not for nothing. In many ways, you're chasing me into the mouth of the wolves. And I don't know if you think you're doing that or not, but when you and again, remember Pius X pointed this out, Joe, over 100 years ago. Modernism is a very, very, very bad heresy. He called it the synthesis of all heresies. That means Albigensianism, Donatism, Gnosticism, Messianism, all of it, okay? He said that's the synthesis of all heresies. And really, that's what we've been dealing with. And many modernists in the church, they are the ones that propose this spirit of Vatican II, that when you speak out against it, tell me if you agree, Joe, you're attacked. And you don't even have to be what you would call a quote-unquote trad. You could just be a normal guy like us and say, look, man, I just want clarity. I'm a Catholic. I want clarity. And we don't get clarity. And I think that's why Bishop Barron, he did write this. And I've heard him speak about this before. And he's a Vatican II adherent, maybe a little bit more than I'd like, because I'd like to tell Bishop Barron, but Bishop Barron, you do know that there's a Vatican I, a Council of Florence, a Council of Trent, and it goes back 2,000 years. I don't really have to tell him that. But then, like I would say, these people that he's speaking of that have become nuns or NONES or spiritual but not religious, Bishop Barron, it's Vatican II that, and this hijacking of it that drove them out in the beginning. So maybe you ought to think about a different way of addressing them. Now, what do you think?
Here's the thing. First of all, yes, there were other councils, but Joe, we live in our faith is, what do you call it? It's an apostolic succession. They're all in line. You see, it goes back. Someone in the chat room just put, why do we have to acknowledge the documents of Vatican II? Because it goes away from the Latin. I'm going to tell you, person in the chat room, because the church said so. That's why. Because the church said in Vatican II that you could have the mass in the vernacular. And here's the deal. They have authority and you don't. And here's the deal. It's like in the movie The Untouchables, when they say to Elliot Ness, now that liquor's legal, what are you going to do? And what he says, I'm going to have a drink because you say I can. You see, I'm a son of the church, and I believe what the church teaches and what it writes down. Now, let's not talk about the bastardization of the documents, which has led to bad fruit and which has led to people leaving. And I don't fault the trads. Listen, these are good Catholics. They want a sense of the sacred. God bless you. What I'm saying is I fault them when they start bashing things that are official teachings of the church, i.e. Vatican II. And I'm going to say it again. The Catechism of the Catholic Church spells out the infallibility of an ecumenical council. Consequently, the teachings of the Second Vatican Council are the teachings of the church. And if you don't like that, create your own church. Call it the Church of John Smith and have a storefront, get yourself a nonprofit status, and worship friggin' whatever you want to call it. Because here's the deal. I will make a bet right now. And you talk about solutions. This is what the bishop should do. You see Francis crack down on Burke. He cracked down on Sarah. You know something? How about we do this? We crack down on the bishops, as in, i.e., people who have authority, who aren't saying the mass in a sense of having a sense of the sacred, who aren't following the documents, who are preaching and teaching from the catechism as it's written. And I'll bet you people don't leave, because I'll bet you that I know so. People have a thirst for the truth. And when they
Right.
recognize it, they see it.
Well, they do see it. I think that's why a lot of times, Joe, they leave irreverent parishes. You mentioned before, you mentioned like if you go, like I'll be honest, so like every time I go to mass with the Sisters of Life, I cry because usually the sisters, it's usually because of profession of vows, and they invite a lot of people, and Orly and I are blessed to be able to go there, and they sing the most beautiful hymns. It's the most beautifully reverent mass. One time we went where it was on St. Michael the Archangel on 34th Street. Father Rutler, he celebrated the Novus Ordo, but ad orientem.
That's the way it
Okay,
should be said.
or it's
That,
really
Joe,
the way
that's in the
it's
documents.
really the way it should be said. And so I would say a lot of times we have in the church, Joe. You talk all the time about when we used to focus more on the politics in this world, and we still do talk about politics, but nonetheless at the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Um, Unfortunately, in the church, there are camps, there are tribes. And if there's one thing that's holding us back as a church in the modern world, especially when we need the unity that the devil hates, okay, amongst all people in the church, okay, we lack that. We fall into tribes. I think our conversation tonight is, I think, very balanced. I'm not bending the knee to anything. I'm very simply, you and I are very simply saying, um, ecumenical council of the church. Of course, I have to listen to it. There are issues with it. It's borne bad fruit. There are questions that need to be answered that haven't been answered, honestly, for 60 years. And this is going on for decades, by the way. This is not anything new. In fact, this all came about in the 70s. We were kids, where they've been calling for a reform of the reform. So this is going on in the church. The problem is people fall into camps. And the only camp I'm interested in is Jesus and his church. And if you deviate from that, then I have an issue with you. And if you don't, then I don't have an issue with you. That is an example of what I'm talking about. You said the church says that the Novus Ordo is a legitimate mass. That's all I need to know. That's all I
That's
need to
right.
know. I don't have to know anything beyond that. You don't now. I'm sorry. You do have some very extreme people in the church. Okay. There's a few of them that come to mind. I'm going to refrain from naming them. Okay. Who actually go so far as to say that a consecration of the Eucharist at the Novus Ordo is a mortal sin and a sacrilege.
Joe, they're
Because
not
it's,
Catholic.
well,
That's
that's
not
what
a Catholic idea. And I'll be as bold enough to call it. Sorry, that is as Protestant as frigging a Baptist storefront church. That's not a Catholic idea. And you don't have to go to the Gregorian to say so. You're creating the church in your own image. Now, don't get me wrong with this conversation. The Novus Ordo Mass needs to be reformed in line with the documents. That's all I'm saying. We're not following the letter of the law, and that's the bad fruit of Vatican II, because somebody has a kumbaya idea of what Christ is about, and they're twisting and manipulating the documents.
right.
You see, that's the problem. These bishop conferences, Joe, I'll be truthful with you. They need some straight talking people to go in there. They talk about a bunch. Sometimes I listen to this crap and they put out these memos. I'm going to be honest with you. The answers are simple. First things, the rosary. Go to daily mass if you can. Go to receive in the state of grace. Go to adoration. Your eyes will see very clearly.
Joe, I want to cut you off there for a second. You want to know why? I left our parish. My wife and I left our parish. Now we found the TLM parish. Okay. I love it. I really do. When we're going to Arizona, I think everybody knows, please pray for me and my wife and our foster son, who's about to become our legal son. All right. I'm going to continue to go to Latin Mass, but I will tell you this. I left our parish for a number of reasons, not because it was Novus Ordo. That had nothing to do with it, but it is a Novus Ordo parish. But I would walk in there once in a while on a Saturday afternoon to go to confession. The priest who took over from the old pastor didn't have a lot of confessions. However, I walked in on Saturday. Joe, there was about 20 people in there Saturday afternoon praying the rosary. And at the end of the day, in my mind, knowing all the things that we're talking about now, I knew that's where I'm supposed to be. What do you think? People are less pious in a Novus Ordo parish? Like not you. I'm talking about like some people out there. No, we pray our rosaries. We sit in adoration. Okay, all of that takes place in a Novus Ordo parish. Now, some are worse than others, Joe. I'm sorry. Some,
no doubt. No,
some pastors are just not very good. I'm sorry.
Absolutely, 100%.
All right. Some pastors are not very good. I want to, Joe, if you don't mind, I want to move the conversation. Let me give you a final thought, and let's move the conversation forward a little bit. I want final thoughts on this from you, please.
Well, okay. Someone said in my Novus Ordo Mass, practicing receiving the Eucharist, this is in the chat room, in the hands of lay ministers. By the way, that's not what the documents say. Once again, I'm going to tell you what the documents say. Priests should give out the Eucharist. The only time a lay minister should be used is out of practicality. There's 1,000 people in the church and there's one priest. That's when. Do you know that I went to Mass at Yankee Stadium for the Pope and there was not one lay minister? All priests, Yankee Stadium, 70,000 people. That statement shows to me, once again, you're talking about the fruit, the bad fruit, the spirit of Vatican II. You're not talking about the documents themselves. Now, getting back to what you said, Joe Pasillo, sadly, you have to shop around. Some pastors are off the frigging wall, at least by us. I've been to some churches off the wall, and I will not waste my time, or will I fund them 1 cent. I told you, I go to a Novus Ordo Mass, Polish American. Polish. They have Polish Mass and they have English Mass. The Poles, I have found, say a good Mass. Novus Ordo Mass, it's a good Mass.
Right.
And here's another thing. I still think it could be reformed. Here's our problem, Joe. Obedience within the clergy and within the laity.
Joe, I want to cut you off real quick, but I want to make a larger point. One more final point about Bishop Barron's article, but real quick. Michael Jones made a good point, okay, about this thing with Pope Francis and coming down on the TLM and everything else. Now, I'm not saying I completely agree with it, but he made a good point. He's like, are you going to allow what Pope Francis did to drive you out of the church? Now, that's a very good point and a valid question to ask. I am not in the SSPX. I don't bash the SSPX, okay? I don't. I know that, just like I don't want to bash anything. I know there's good people there, and I'm just not going to do that, okay? But the SSPX is in schism, okay?
Joe, you hit it right on the head. There's nothing to bash.
Right.
Like the church.
Are you going to allow Pope Francis and his recent rulings? Now, we're not going to comment on that tonight, but that's not going to drive me,
Joe. But here's the thing:
out of the church. And the
Pope
thing is,
Francis, it's his pastoral approach. He hasn't changed dogma. Like, you could disagree with how he said something or what he said. I'm talking about hard and fast teachings. Has he been ambiguous? Have people made inferences? Have this? The church is no different. He's a pope and there'll be another pope. Do you believe in the efficacy of the sacraments? I don't care who the pope is. I'm still going to be Catholic because I believe in the sacraments. Like, this is where, I'll be honest with you, I see all this back and forth. To me, it means nothing. It means nothing.
Well, let me ask you this. let's put a finer point on this, okay?
Someone says the SSPX is not in schism. What world are you in the
Right.
chat room? They are
Right.
too.
Listen,
The
if
church-
it's a debate, Abby's in the chat room. She says SSPX is not in schism. Abby, look, there are good people on both sides who argue the point. There actually is a debate from, it's a bad video copy, a debate from about 25, 30 years ago between Michael Davies and E. Michael Jones on this very point. I love Michael Davies. I love E. Michael Jones. They disagree on the point. Okay. I happen to think that the SSPX is in schism.
Joe,
You
they
want to know
are.
why? Joe, you want to know why? You want to know why I do? I'm going to tell you why I do. Not because of anything having to do with the SSPX. I'm going to be honest with you. Because of a saint. You always talk on the show about the example of the saints. Okay. I think, in my view, as much as I know about it, I think Padre Pio was dealt with unjustly. I really
absolutely.
do. Okay. He went in exile for 10 years. Why? Because he was obedient to his authority. The authority was wrong, but he was still obedient. He did what he had to do. He shut his mouth. He was basically not doing anything for 10 years. And the day he died, he celebrated Mass. Okay. Now, I will take Padre Pio's example. Right or wrong, your ultimate authority is Christ. He gave these men authority. They will have to answer to him. Our job is that we have to, unless it's grievous error, Joe, unless it's really grievous error. Okay. We're under their authority because we're not the church.
Joe,
You are not the
that's
church,
right.
and I am not
You
the
are
church.
100% correct that you hit it right on the head. Someone mentioned Lefebvre. He endorsed. He has no authority. Authority is given to him. It comes down to what Our Lady said. Listen to him. You see, people rationalize things in their head because they want to create things in their own image and likeness and what they like. It comes down to this. The only authority comes from the church itself, the documents. And here's another thing. The documents under Francis haven't changed. The church teaches what it has taught yesterday, today, and forever will. I particularly don't like his style. I'll go on record in saying that. He's too unclear for me. That's me personally. I'm not bashing him. I'm talking about his approach. And whether he has, and only God will judge him, and I'll never say a word otherwise, if he has basically weaponized his ambiguity and or is using it specifically in his mind, quote unquote, for the betterment, like it's sincere, that's for God to judge. I'm not going to go there. I personally like clarity.
Right.
I've said this is me. But the church's teachings haven't changed under Francis. It's still the teachings of the church. And just because you don't like him, okay, you're entitled.
Well,
but
Joe,
the church is the church.
Joe, look, I know one thing as a Catholic, okay? The Pope is accorded due respect. We have to listen to what he says. And I am at full liberty, and so are you, and so is any other Catholic, okay? When he offers an opinion that is his opinion, okay? I'm not bound to believe it. I'm actually obligated to perhaps criticize it, okay? But it's not an I think it's a misconception of infallibility, okay? When the Pope speaks and makes an opinion on global warming, I could say, okay, Papa,
But
I heard
that's
you.
not
I
within
respect
the
you.
dogmas
But
of the church, though.
that's not that falls within my prudential judgment. The church teaches that also, so I don't have to listen to you. But when he does speak, and Pope Francis has not, and let's face it, not many popes have actually spoken infallibly. There's only been very few who've actually spoken infallibly from the chair in all of human history. But there have been councils, all right, that have spoken infallibly, like Trent, like Florence, like Vatican I, and as you said, Vatican II, okay, that when the church speaks like that, we have to listen. And again, let's put a finer point on it. Our problem is not with Vatican II. Our problem is that the hijacking that took place that led to the bleeding out of the church to what Bishop Barron was talking about, which now you get a lot of ex-Catholics who are spiritual but not religious. But Joe, I want to make a point. We don't have a lot of time left, okay? We might not get to Albania and communism, but that'll be a conversation for another day. One thing I did like about Bishop Barron's article, okay, is, Joe, you know, I have a real, I think I've listened to more of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse more than you have, probably ad nauseum, okay? Dawkins, Dennett, Hitchens when he was alive, Sam Harris, okay? And they would have you believe that the world is becoming atheist. The world is done with religion, okay? In any form. Spirituality, organized religion, Buddhism, Eastern religion, mysticism, all of it. We are more rational now, Joe Resinello. We follow science now. Part of what Bishop Barron was trying to say was, against their expectations, these people who they thought were going to become atheists have not. Now, they have the natural religion, okay? And what is the natural religion? As let's say it's, he points out what are the aspects of it: community, ritual, okay? Obedience, or like all these different aspects of religion, and that they're low-hanging fruit. That's the way I take it. That's the way I interpret his article. And I think it's important to recognize that because, Joe, my attitude is this. You and I have said from the beginning since we started doing this show, okay, is that if we save one soul, we've done our job, okay? If we can help one soul come back to the church, we've done our job. And I think what Bishop Barron is basically saying is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there, but more importantly, the atheists are wrong. The watering down of religion only can lead to a more watered down religion, but religion is still there. And the church teaches that, Joe, too, that natural religion is something you cannot get rid of. You can't get rid of. And we need to challenge these people with the gospel in order to bring them back into the fullness of religion, the fullness of truth, which is in the Catholic Church. I want to throw it over to you for that idea.
Well, I would agree. I mean, it shouldn't be watered down. And I'll just defer with what Ralph Martin said. The spirit of Vatican II doesn't work. Basically, I'm going on my diatribe is what we see isn't in the documents. That's all. That's it. And, ultimately, authority lies in the church. If the church says so, I say so. And it's not for you or me or anyone for that matter to craft the church. And that's where the spirit of Vatican II comes in, Joe. It's been crafted and manipulated. And frankly, that's the problem. Because if you stick to the vine, you will bear fruit. Joe, and I have witnessed this with my own life and also in religious orders and in churches. When you adhere to the vine, you bear fruit. Jesus said so.
Joe, I'm glad you said that, but in a couple minutes that we have left, but I want your comments on this particular point, which is that Barron's talking about that the natural progression of leaving religion. Now, obviously, he's talking about leaving the Catholic faith, but even leaving even more Orthodox Christianity. If you wanted to throw Anglicanism in there or Orthodoxy, like Eastern Orthodoxy, okay? He's arguing that the atheists have argued that the watering down will lead to eventually a no religion whatsoever. Science is our God or any other false religion. I want your thoughts on that, because what he's saying is that even at an extreme level, people, and this is, he says, statistically borne out, people still have a natural religion. That he's saying the atheists are wrong. You cannot and you will not get rid of the inherent desire to believe, to be a part of a community, to have ritual. I mean, we see it in all these things.
So we're wired that way. We're wired as humans that way. Like there is, what does St. Augustine say? The heart does not rest until it rests in thee.
But who is thee? I guess that's the question. Like people make themselves into gods, Joe, and all these different things. I just think the larger point I'm trying to glean from Bishop Barron is that the atheists are wrong. Even in watered down religion still exists. You can't stomp it out. But I'm going to hand that over to you for the next minute or so.
Religion is not going. Religion existed when people were writing on cave walls. Like, people who think that they could stomp out religion, dude, you're just not a student of history. You don't understand how humans tick. That's just a ridiculous conversation. Like, my solution is, if you ask me, very simple: stick to the vine. Stick to the vine. Put down your pride. Be obedient. And you know something? You'll bear fruit. You will bear fruit, and the churches will be packed. They will be packed. And I'm going to tell you this right now. Just watch how things, you know something? God defends those who are on the right side. Historically speaking, Padre Pio, Jean Jagan, who started the Little Sisters of the Poor, her order was taken from her. On the person's deathbed, I believe it was a priest, he recanted his behavior. Watch history. And to be honest with you, you'll be defended. People, a lot of times, people who say things, do things in the moment are put down. But ultimately, the truth always moves forth. And those who are on the right, what was it in scripture with Paul? He said, if this man is not of God, he'll be forgotten. But if he is, it's like you're fighting against God.
You bring up a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Gamaliel said that.
Yes.
Gamaliel said, and Gamaliel was Paul's teacher. Okay. And Gamaliel was a learned Jew. And he gave them, it's very important, Joe Russell, I'm glad you brought it up. He gave them the example. He said, we had other saviors. We had other messiahs. And they went by the wayside. And if this man, Jesus, is not the Messiah, these people will go away. Here's my thing. I will adhere to the church. And at some point, if Vatican II is as bad as people say, you know what's going to happen, Joe? There's going to be a Vatican III. And you know what? Whatever needs to be reformed will be reformed. What needs to be retained will be retained.
That's right.
And we're going to move on as a church.
That's right. But here's the thing. I'm willing to bet. I'll be truthful with you. I'm willing to bet Vatican II is going nowhere. I'll go on record right now.
I will say this. I will say that there will be a reaction against the liberals and leftists in the church that hijacked it, that we've been talking about the whole time. They hijacked it and tried to suit the teachings to fit, to exploit any potential ambiguities there. They'll go. That'll be done away with. And what you'll be left with is what Robert George told us. Beautiful documents that are no different than the last 2,000 years of church.
Absolutely. Teaching. John Martinini said the same exact thing. His exact words, nothing changed.
Ralph Martin said the same thing.
Nothing changed.
Are these liberal Catholics? Are these leftists? Are these Freemasons? Are these communists? Are these people who want to water down the religion? No. There are people who say, as you started out the conversation by saying, this is an ecumenical council. All right. And anything wrong with it will be reformed, and everything good will be retained.
We'll go back to Lefebvre, who would not accept Vatican II. And I'm going to refer it back to Karapi. I remember when Karapi had his beef, and I remember talking to a very holy...
Joe, we have 30 seconds. Go ahead.
I was talking to a very holy nun. She was an MC, old woman, very prayerful. She said he should have said nothing because God would have defended him. If Lefebvre was right, God would have defended him. And that goes for all of it. God defends the true, the good, and the beautiful. Will Vatican II be reformed? Absolutely. We're not following the documents. Let's follow them. And I bet you if we do, we bear fruit.
Let's leave it there. Thank you for joining us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. Always on air, always online. Stick around. Jonathan just posted in the chat room that you could join us afterwards for a private chat, and we'll have a little bit more of a conversation. Remember, the Crusade channel, Mike Church, Rick Barrett, Kennedy Hall, the last live radio station standing. We'll talk to you. Remember that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.